My name is Peter Abelo.
Hi, I'm Ani Schiffmiller.
Hi, I'm Donnie Abelo.
We are tour guides and Israel educators.
And each week, one of us, or one of our colleagues, will be presenting
a real taste of Israel as we take you with us on our journey around the country.
Israel is beautiful.
Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome for another special episode for Yom Yerushalayim of today's Pulse of Israel. And I would like to welcome my very esteemed and loved tour guide and father, Peter Abelo. Shalom, Abba. Out of respect, I call you Abba. Hello, Abba.
Hi, Avi. Shalom. How are you?
Good. This is very, very special. I thought, how more special can we get than actually talking to someone who visited Israel before 1967 and hear some of the memories of how Jerusalem was pre-1967, the divided Jerusalem when Jordan illegally occupied half of Jerusalem, the old city. So, Abba, tell us, what do you remember about visiting Jerusalem pre-1967? And then we'll go to thoughts about today. So take us back.
Oh, gosh. So I was in Israel in 1963 as a teenager on one of the summer programs sponsored by the Jewish Agency. It was very fortunate circumstances. I was awarded a scholarship by my synagogue. I was the first recipient of what became an annual scholarship of sending one of the students from the Hebrew school in their post program to Israel. They sent me with Young Judea, and the summer of 1963, 17 years old, journeying to Israel, then 15 years young, I guess, right? 1948, 1963. And it was an amazing, amazing experience to visit Israel in 1963. It's interesting because, we've lived here, of course, Avi, we made Aliyah as a family in the summer of 1990. So we've been here this summer, it'll be 30 years now. We've been, thank God, living in Israel. We're neighbors in Efrat, right, which was also in Jordanian hands back in 1963. And I guess between 1963 and our Aliyah in 1990, probably visited at least 4 or 5 times, maybe more. I talk about that in a moment. I was here in 69, we were here in 71, we were here in 80, we were here in 82, we were here in 85, we were here in 87, we were here in 88. That's what, 6-7 trips to Israel, even before Aliyah, which means we had visited, and most of those trips were post-1967. I still vividly remember the pictures in my mind of Jerusalem and of Israel prior to 1963. I was on Masada before the excavations of Masada. They didn't take place until 1964-65. And of course, I was in Jerusalem, which was a divided city. And yet, despite the fact that I've been here 30 years and that we'd made 5-6 trips prior to our moving, the images of Jerusalem, the way it was back then, are still vivid in my mind, probably aided by pictures that we've seen since. But it was a very, very different place. Jerusalem was a divided city. Israel was a much, much smaller country. The roads were narrow. The road from the airport to Jerusalem was a windy road, bypassing Latrun, which was in Jordanian hands. So for those of us who make that trip today, you simply ride up past Modi'in and Latrun. Those were Jordanian occupied back in 1963. There was a long detour through Ramla and then out what's called Samut Nachshon and Samut Shimshon on the Beit Shemesh road, and then turning back up towards Shaar HaGai, and then making the winding, narrow climb up to Jerusalem. I remember that vividly. I remember the locations of the vehicles that are now in 2-step locations along that road, vehicles that are reminders of the losses along that road in the siege of Jerusalem back in the spring of the late winter, early spring of 1948. But they used to be placed at the places on the road where those ambushes took place. And you might even remember that too, because it's fairly recent.
I remember being so emotional as a kid visiting Israel and climbing the climb from Kvish Echad, from the main road number 1 up through the hills, all the way up the hills, the mountains to Jerusalem.
Right.
always feeling emotional about it, and seeing the destroyed trucks on the side of the road, and remembering how they were part of the struggle for Jerusalem in 1948. Yeah, I remember.
So 1963 was probably not terribly different than it was 15 years earlier. I'm sure the road had been repaved, straightened out a little bit, but it was still curvy, 2 lanes, very windy and narrow. It eventually became a 4-lane highway. Now it's a 6-lane highway. But I have very, very vivid memories of that. And I think probably the greatest memory of that trip was that the public bus, because again, I was here as a youth, and we had a tremendous amount of freedom to go around on our own. And I would visit relatives in Haifa. You remember we had cousins living in Haifa at the time. So the trip from Haifa back to Jerusalem was 2 buses. It was first the bus from Haifa to Tel Aviv, and then changing for the Jerusalem bus in Tel Aviv. And then the bus from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem made a stop along the way at a kiosk at Tzomah Shimshon.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't a direct road. First, it was a 2-hour trip. It was not a 40-minute or 50-minute bus trip.
From Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was a 2-hour trip.
Sure, because it was all on small roads, again, through Ramla and then through intersections.
No, I think it's important that you mention that. I mean, you mentioned that Latrun was in Jordanian hands at the time. Again, the illegal occupation of Jordan. People don't understand that, anyone who talks about the 2-state solution, giving up Judea and Samaria, would basically mean endangering that road once again, just as it was from 1948 to 1967, that we wouldn't have a straight road. That road was under Jordan.
So let me clarify that even more. Anybody who talks about a 2-state solution along the lines of 1967 lines, right? The lines that existed from 1948 to 1967 were ludicrous. They were the ceasefire lines. They were never borders. And yes, the main highway, I would say probably a good 4 or 5 mile stretch of the main highway, which is the direct link today between Tel Aviv and the airport, and then Jerusalem, passes through the Latrun salient, which was held by Jordan for those 19 years. We had a number of very, very devastating battles with heavy losses in June and July of 1948. We failed to conquer Latrun, which the British so kindly left to the Jordanians when they left the country. And we failed to open up the road. That's why the whole story of Mickey Marcus and the Burma Road. We had to find a way of bypass that Jordanian roadblock. I mean, that spot was there for strategic reasons. The Crusaders built there. Joshua fought a critical battle there in terms of access to Jerusalem. The Crusaders built there 2,000 years after Joshua for good reason, because that intersection controlled access to Jerusalem, and we lost it. And that's why prior to 1967, the miracle that we opened up Shaar HaGai, the road through the valley, but the access to it had to bypass Latrun in a long looping bypass, and the bus would stop at Shomet Shimshon, which today doesn't even exist anymore. That existed only till a couple of years ago, until the new Beit Shemesh road was expanded. Yeah, but today it's a modern interchange. But the bus would stop there, we'd get out, and you get coffee or soda or something, and then get back on the bus for the second half of the journey, the second hour for the trip up to Jerusalem. So I have very vivid memories of that, and I think we probably even stopped there still in 1969 when the road was first being built. I don't remember when the first time we rode the main highway, but one of the first things Israel did once we liberated that area in 1967 in the 6-Day War is open up a straight road from the airport, from Tel Aviv, right to Jerusalem. The train runs along that road today. Just to allude to what you said a few moments ago, I don't think anybody in their right mind is thinking that should be traded away for peace. I mean, if one is going that direction for peace, the Latrun salient, the main highway, the route of the train, Modi'in, those are not going to anybody. I think those.
Right, but we do have plenty of fellow Jews and even Israelis who somehow give a holiness to the 1967 ceasefire line, thinking that should be what Israel goes back to in order to achieve peace, and it's basically irresponsible on all levels, and yet they talk that way.
Yeah, I think it's out of ignorance. I think there are many Israelis who are ignorant. You might remember this. We were in Israel already, and your daughter Judy was in Netanya. And she took a taxi from Netanya to Jerusalem. To us. To business, right. And he was refusing to cross the green line, the taxi driver. He left this guy, and she put me on the line. And I said, "Oh, wait, how are you getting to Jerusalem?" He said, I'm taking the main highway. I said, well, you're crossing the green line. He says, no, I'm not. I said, of course you are. The minute you pass Shalavim and that the Nofai alone on the highway, Latrun is on your right. You are now in Jordanian territory. You have crossed the green line. No, I haven't. I'm sure not. So these are the days before WhatsApp and photographs. I remember meeting Judy in Jerusalem and showing him the map. And he scratches, oh my God, I never realized it. I mean, Israelis don't know that the pre-67 lines were indefensible, ludicrous, and in terms of today have implications. It's very fashionable to say, let's go back to 67, but that's totally impossible. I mean, even the U.S. government has recognized that in previous governments when they talked about adjustments.
Right.
I mean, that's an area which clearly nobody conceived of giving away again, because it's a vital part of the link between the coast and Jerusalem. And the main super train today runs right along that highway through 4 or 5 miles of quote unquote West Bank. So I have vivid memories of those roads from that time. I have memories of the bypass. I have memories of coming back up. If you can kind of picture this, you get to Shimshon, you turn left on what today is Road 38. You go 3-4 miles, came to another intersection, which existed, by the way, even when we first moved to Israel. The intersection of 38 and the main Highway 1, and then turn right and then begin the ascent up through Shaar HaGai to Jerusalem. So I remember that extremely well. And I remember Jerusalem very well. I remember what it was like to be in a divided Jerusalem during those years, during that year in particular.
I brought up some pictures to show you to bring back memories of specific sites in Jerusalem pre-1967.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's nice. It's nice that you're able to reflect 1963 when you were there, and then 1969, seeing the same places. So if you'd like to reflect upon them, I don't know which picture is coming up first.
Okay.
Let's see what the share screen gives us. What it gives us.
That was your day?
Picture number 1, Abba. What are we?
Oh, okay, good. So first of all, these are the walls of the old city. And no man's land in between. Just to give you kind of a frame of reference of what we're looking at, off to the right is the southwest corner of the walls. And this is the stretch of wall between Mount Zion and that southwest corner and the Jaffa gate, which is just out of view on the left-hand side. One of the towers of Migdal David, of the David Citadel, is at the extreme left of the picture. We're looking at the walls of the old city. This is the view. Actually, I have a picture of my own slides. I'm going to have to transfer my slides one of these days. Not so different from this. This is probably taken from the roof of the Notre Dame hospice, which, for those of you familiar with Jerusalem today, is at the foot of Jaffa, Rehov Yafo, where the train turns left towards Damascus Gate, towards Shashtem. So right at that turn, you have the wall directly in front of you. And there's that stretch of wall, which is just to the left of this picture, which we don't see, which leads right up to Jaffa Gate. So Notre Dame was a French hospice built, I would say, probably in the late 19th century. At that corner, at that intersection, it remained in Israeli hands in the ceasefire lines of 1949 at the end of the War of Independence. And so actually we got to that roof. We climbed up to the roof. And it was the closest place you could get to the old city. We were literally right across the walls from the old city. Keep in mind that for those 19 years, who's sitting on those walls that we're looking at in this picture? The Jordanians.
Sitting on the old city walls.
Yes, these are Jordanian walls. I mean, the old city was totally in Jordanian hands. And the area in between that we see here in the valley is today, I'm going to say this is the area of the outdoor Mamila Mall today. And a little bit further towards the walls, the area of what's called Teddy Park, that whole beautiful garden and park. There's fountains and a whole Chutzotei Yotzer, the artist's courtyard, would be in the view of this picture today. But the most prominent feature would be the Mamila Mall, which I'm sure anybody been to Jerusalem, we're all familiar with that. You walk through the mall, it comes right at Jaffa Gate. So this is the area of today, the Mamila Mall, and the a little bit more to the right, but the David Citadel Hotel, obviously, which didn't exist then. And we're looking at the no man's land between the Jordanian line and the Israeli lines. I am at a roof at the edge of the Israeli line, looking at the old city.
Right, and Jaffa Gate is just to the left of the picture. It's not in the picture.
you see the tower of Migdal David. There's like the square tower, which is a little bit higher than the rest of the wall. That is the corner of the David Citadel, which is over the Jaffa Gate. So yeah, Jaffa Gate is down to the left, just out of the picture, in the walls.
All right, so let's go see what other picture we can get.
Amazing to see that, right?
Yeah.
It was also amazing climbing, but talk about feelings as well. And I don't know that the feelings registered on the mind as a 17-year-old, much as they should. And it's interesting. I came from a traditional background, as you know. I was raised the synagogue that sent me. For those of you who know New York City, I was raised in B'nai Jeshurun, which is one of the flagship conservative synagogues. In the time of a rabbi who was a extremely well-known rabbi in the conservative movement, Rabbi Israel Goldstein. One of the ironies of my life is that today, as you know, I'm teaching in the Ramah program. I'm teaching math in the Ramah program on the Israel Goldstein campus in Jerusalem, dedicated in honor of Israel Goldstein, whom I grew up with as my rabbi. He bar mitzvahed me at my bar mitzvah in 1959. And I was the recipient of that scholarship. But I came from a traditional home, as you know. We observed, we held Shabbat. Yom Tov was observed in our home, obviously as part of our lifestyle. Kashrut, we grew up in a totally kosher home. I was with Young Judea. Young Judea was a very Zionistic group. I think in many ways more teenagery than me. My background is a little bit stronger than many, and yet I don't know that it dawned on me in 1963 the significance of standing there and being not able to go there.
Right. Looking into the old city of Jerusalem, but being forbidden to enter.
Right. I'm being told by a tour guide, that's Jordan, and that's the old city, and the Western Wall is there, and our holy places are there, and that's Mount Scopus in the background, but we can't go there because it's a different country. Okay. Yeah, right. I don't know that really began to dawn on me in significance until the Six-Day War and the tremendous change that those amazing 6 days in June 1967 brought. But yeah, I looked into it from afar back in 1963.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's see what other pictures we come up with now. Here's one.
Okay, so in those days, Jerusalem was a divided city. One of the anomalies of the 1948 battles in Jerusalem and the armistice agreement that were signed, the ceasefire lines that were ultimately determined by Moshe Dayan, a famous name, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the eye patch, right? Moshe Dayan, and representing the Jordanians, Abdullah Tal. So there was Jerusalem was a divided city. Jerusalem was a city with a wall in its heart. I mentioned in the different presentation that I've done that Naomi Shemer, and maybe it's worth it mentioning now because it's an amazing, amazing story. Back in May of 1967, it was the 19th anniversary of Israel. It's interesting, May 1967 coincided with Hey Iyar, right, which happens every 19 years that the Jewish calendar and the secular Gregorian calendar are in sync. So for the first time since the birth of Israel in 1948, in May 1967, the two dates coincided. And by that point, there was already an Israeli song festival that would hallmark the events of the Independence Day, and an Israeli songwriter by the name of Naomi Shemer was asked by Teddy Kollek, the mayor of Jerusalem, to write a song specifically about Jerusalem, because the theme of the festival that year was going to be Jerusalem, of the 19th Israel Song Festival.
Right. And this was before the 6-Day War.
May 15th, 1967. Nobody knew there would be war 3 weeks later. The war broke out on June 5th, right? This is 3 weeks before. And Naomi Shemer wrote a song called Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. I'm going to choke up saying this. Teddy Kollek heard it. It was not in the competition. It was actually performed during the intermission. It was not one of the songs in the competition, yet it clearly was the winner that night. People walked away from the festival singing Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. It's interesting that I just had recently read this story from a fellow guide who had sent it out to us and never knew this. It was performed by an artist named Shuli Natan at the festival. Shuli Natan was an amateur singer in the IDF, in the army. And Naomi Shemer had heard her just coincidentally about the time she was writing the song. And she said, that's the person I want for my song. Her voice was just so perfect for it. And she went to Teddy Kollek And Teddy Kollek said, come on, there's some great artists we have in Israel in those days. I want one of the star artists of Israel to sing that song. And Naomi Shemer said, no way. If you want my song, Shuli Natan sings it. And so this amateur who had never performed in a theater before under the lights got the designation to sing Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. And evidently, by the end of the festival, people were singing it already.
Wow. And why is it making you choke up, Abba?
Because, it was just a powerful, come back to Mandelbaum Gate, because I never got to that, all right?
Yeah, I'm going to focus on you. I'll go back to that in a second.
Because the song spoke about the dream and the yearning of coming back to Jerusalem. It said, it's a city, Ubiliba Choma, with a wall down its heart. That's the wall the song referred to, not the Kotel, not the Western Wall, but the wall that divided the city into two. Ubiliba Choma, Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. It talked about the yearning of once again being able to go back to the marketplaces of the old city and to go down to Yam HaMelech, B'derech Yericho, by way of Jericho. Those were all impossibilities. They were a dream in May 1967. They became a reality 3 weeks later. And so when the song was performed by Naomi Shemer for the first time during the war, but just after the liberation, she quickly wrote a new verse. And it was the verse which we all know today as part of the song of now we once again can go down to Jericho and we have access to the alleyways. Right? The dream is a reality. And that's probably why Yerushalayim Shel Zahav became like a second national anthem to Israel, because it was written when we were still dreaming and yearning and hoping. And 3 weeks later, Naomi Shemer's dream became a reality. And now we have access once again. But go back to Mandelbaum Gate, because that's the period when Jerusalem is still divided. And I have this picture in my own pictures as well. We got to the Mandelbaum Gate. This was the only place in Jerusalem that people could cross from one side, the Israeli side, to the Jordanian, or vice versa. But who was permitted to cross? First of all, the gate, the crossing was only under United Nations supervision. So Israelis couldn't cross. Jews couldn't cross. People with Israel stamped in your passport couldn't cross. Right? Now, had you come from Israel, well, sometimes people had to have a separate second passport just to cross to get into Jordan and visit the old city. And Christians, like in this picture here, who wanted to visit Christian holy sites, either they were coming from Jordan, had they crossed from Israel first, because this is on the Israeli side, obviously.
Right, this was a crossing. People have to understand, right outside of the old city walls, this was a border crossing between Israel and Jordan.
100%, right? And here we are, Bruchim Habayim LiYisrael, welcome to Israel. This is the Israeli side welcoming people back from the Jordanians. Israel had no such restrictions, obviously, of people coming from the other side. The one thing I'll mention about this, and I knew this story in 63 as well, in 1963, again, without really appreciating its significance. In 1948-49, the armistice lines, the ceasefire lines, Israel miraculously held Mount Scopus. We also held Mount Zion, by the way. I was on Mount Zion as well, even though we were literally right under the guns of the Jordanians to walk there, which was, I'm thinking about it, they would never take a youth program there today, but we walked out along to Mount Zion, past Sultan's Pools, which was no man's land, around the hill, and up to the church of Mount Zion, which was in Israeli hands, 20 feet across from the walls.
Where the Jordanian soldiers were standing with guns.
Yeah, right across from us. And no pictures to be taken. We weren't allowed to take pictures, but we were there. Here is the other place that Israel managed to hold on to was Mount Scopus, and it was even a more dire situation than Mount Zion because there was no connection. All of the territory between Mount Scopus and the Israeli side of Jerusalem were lost and held by the Jordanians. There was, a quarter of a mile or a third of a mile of Arab neighborhoods, Sheikh Jarrah, between Mandelbaum Crossing and Mount Scopus. So who got to Mount Scopus? Well, nobody. The Hebrew University had already been abandoned in April. The Hadassah Hospital on Mount Scopus was abandoned in April. And now a year and a half later, we held on.
You're skipping over something. I mean, it was abandoned because of the horrible terror attack that killed the doctors traveling to Mount Scopus.
Correct. And the inaccessibility. I mean, that was just the straw that broke the camel's back. Already in February and March, there were terror attacks on the connecting streets between western side of Jerusalem and the university on Mount Scopus. Classes had long since ceased on the campus of the university. We were still using the hospital, and indeed the attack you referred to, which I want to say was April 18th, 1948, it was in April 1948, was a horrible ambush of a convoy bringing doctors and nurses and patients and medications and supplies to the Hadassah Hospital on Mount Scopus. The tragedy is that in the attack, 70 people were killed, including the head of the hospital, Dr. Yaski, who was returning from some time off in Jerusalem. Many patients, many nurses, many doctors were killed. The British basically stood by and did nothing to intervene. They didn't want to take the responsibility of intervening without orders from up high, because there are all sorts of political implications. They're leaving the country in a month anyway. The tragedy is that 70 people died. Subsequently now, the hospital is inaccessible, and now the university has long since been closed, and those two facilities remain closed down for the next 19 years. The only people on Mount Scopus are a small unit of the Israeli army holding on to our position there, and the only Israelis permitted to cross through the Mandelbaum crossing were soldiers going through under UN supervision every 2 weeks to bring fresh food supplies to the soldiers on Mount Scopus, to change shifts with the soldiers on Mount Scopus. Of course, in 1967, the fact that we held Mount Scopus strategically played a very critical role in our encircling the old city and ultimately conquering the old city. Remember, we came in from the Mount Scopus side through the Lions Gate,
right?
1967. So there are a lot of little things about 1948, 49 that, although at the time seemed rather tragic and rather difficult to live with, became part of the great miracle only 19 years later in 1967.
You're saying the tragedy of Mount Scopus being an island is surrounded by illegally occupied Jordanian territory, and but thank God we had it, because that helped with the battle for the old city of Jerusalem in 1967.
And interestingly enough, I'm not 100% sure the accuracy of what I'm about to tell you, who the person is, but one of the drivers who drove the last bus out of Jerusalem, out of Mount Scopus in 1948, was a driver in a half-track bringing paratroopers back to Mount Scopus 19 years later.
Wow. Unbelievable.
I don't remember the exact unit, but he always talked about it as one of the most emotional moments of his life of making that return trip. And maybe one other thing about Mount Scopus, so Scopus is abandoned now, except for the army. We built a whole new university in Givat Ram. In the early 1950s, it's completed. We built a whole new Hadassah hospital in Ein Karen. People who've gone to the Chagall windows, that's the new Hadassah hospital. On the Israeli side of the wall of the split city, in 1967, we had the opportunity to once again reunite the institutions. And so that's why Hebrew University has two campuses, Mount Scopus and Givat Ram. Because we've restored the Givat Ram campus, the Mount Scopus campus. That's why Hebrew University, Hadassah Hospital has two divisions, right? And maybe a little side story, which also touches me tremendously. One of the very popular versions of the Hatikva, which is played frequently, this magnificent orchestral version of Hatikva, is a recording of the first Hatikva to be played in the first concert given in the amphitheater of the Hebrew University on Mount Scopus, probably 3 or 4 weeks after the war, late June or early July 1967, when the Israeli Philharmonic performed, and Leonard Bernstein, who was then the musical director of the New York Philharmonic, came to conduct, and the final piece of the concert was Hatikva on Mount Scopus.
Wow.
Yeah, 67.
Again, Abba, it's just, just seeing your emotion. It's like you're bringing us back to, without having to use words, you're bringing us into the emotional state of, correct me if I'm wrong, of appreciating the miracle from experiencing Jerusalem, divided Jerusalem pre-1967, understanding the implications, and then understanding the miracle of it being united.
Because you know what? Because for your generation, this is history, right? Anybody 50, we're now 53 years since the reunification. So anybody 40 and above, and anybody younger than 40, 41, whatever, doesn't remember 1967. It's history for you guys, right? I was there. For me, it was something I lived through. I lived through the emotion. I remember where I was when they announced that Jerusalem was reunited. I was saying, where were you?
Where were you, Abba?
It was Wednesday, June 7th, and there was a massive rally for Israel in Washington, D.C. And people traveled from all over the United States and Canada and other countries to rally on the lawn of the Capitol, where over time, many, many rallies and protests have taken place. At that point, I think it was one of the largest rallies ever to have taken place in that location, with congressmen speaking and heads of whatever Jewish organizations. I cannot tell you who spoke or what. Remember, I'm 21 years old. I was in my final year of college at this point. I came down with a bus from City College, Hillel, in New York. But there were thousands and thousands of people. And somebody had just gotten done speaking, a senator, a congressman, the head of some major Jewish organization. And somebody took the mic and said, "We have just received news from Israel that Jerusalem is ours." Wow. So the mood changed dramatically. There was a spontaneous singing at Hatikva and a few more speeches, but singing and dancing and euphoria in Washington, D.C. on the late afternoon of June 7th, 1967. I don't know, 3, 4 in the afternoon, 5 in the afternoon, 7 hours earlier, 7 hours later in Israel, I guess. I don't remember what time it was, but again, I happened to be there in Washington when the announcement was made to the thousands of throngs that had assembled there in support of Israel that day. It was just an amazing moment of history. So for me, it's history. You want to know why I'm emotional? I'm living history. These are magic moments in my life, particularly because I appreciated, people didn't come to Israel before then the way they do today. And I was fortunate to have been here and seen Israel and lived in Israel and felt what it was like to be in the divided city. So this is Mamila. This is another picture of the area where the David Citadel Hotel is today in the Mamila Mall. And I walked down this street back in 1963. And again, on the walls in the background are Jordanians. They're Jordanian soldiers. You can't quite see in this picture the sandbags. But if you walked along here, you literally were under the guns of the Jordanians. And here was another place that we had come to as a group. Should I admit this to you? I was a little bit of a reckless teenager, I and 2 of my friends, one of whom has a son now living in Efrat. So Gene was from Pittsburgh. I'm from New York. And I'm pretty sure a third person went with us, a fellow named Harold Arkin from Winnipeg, Canada, who was part of our group. And we came here and we walked in the street, even though we've been told, don't go back there on your own, right? So we did. And I took some pictures of my own, even though we were told, do not take pictures. And in those days, taking pictures was not a digital camera. I mean, this is my camera with film, right? And I'm not holding it up like this. I'm kind of holding it at my side, just shooting. And I shot like maybe 4 or 5 pictures on the hope that something would come out. I didn't know until I got back to America after the trip and was sent off to be developed. And I happened to have a picture of Jordanian soldiers sitting on the walls looking at us. And I remember quite vividly with there. And all of a sudden, one of the Jordanian soldiers stood up and went like this. I don't know if it's showing in the picture. Right? Show me that. And like this. And something came flying towards us. And we ran. I'd never been, one of the moments I've been most scared of my life. You think it's a grenade, right? That's the emotion of a grenade. It was a rock. It was not a grenade, but it got us out of there pretty quickly. Right. But that's how close we were. And this is Jerusalem in 1963 and in 1964 and 1965. And for those 19 years, it's a divided city. And it's a city, biliba choma, with a wall down its heart. This is what Naomi Shemer was singing about. Not the kotel, not the ancient walls of the old city, the wall that split the city in 2 for those 19 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So,
that's why today's so significant. That's why Yom Yerushalayim is so critically important to us. Because, again, people who talk about, East Jerusalem, West Jerusalem, divided, just like Latrun, you're not going to do that. It doesn't make sense. Forget about it. It doesn't make sense on the ground. Yeah, I love this one. I have this picture also. I'm going to not comment for a minute and see if people can identify the spot. I mean, it clearly doesn't exist anymore. It's, again, part of the wall that split the city. So now I want you to come with me. Let's drive past the King David Hotel. We're on King David Street. Called Melech David.
King David Hotel would be on our right.
It'll be on our right behind us, a couple of blocks behind us. And then we come to the large intersection at the foot of Agron. just past the David Citadel Hotel. And then we cross that traffic light. To our left is Agron Street, which begins to go up towards the center of town, and the former U.S. Consulate, Independence Park, Super Sol, right, all of that. And now we continue, and now we pass the new Mamila Hotel and the entrance to Mamila Mall. And then you come to an intersection, and Jaffa Road is off to our left. You make a left turn at a traffic light into Jaffa Road, and a little bit more of an extreme left into the street called Shivtei Yisrael Street. And in between is the Kiryah, is the municipality of Jerusalem. This is the corner where Jaffa Road hit that intersection of King David Street.
This is Shivtei Yisrael, King David Street.
Yes. Again, you don't see Jaffa Road. It's coming at a slightly different angle. If you see where the boy in the middle of the picture is standing, more in front of him is Jaffa Road coming in, is Rehov Yafo coming in.
Right, and where that big that circular wall is, that's where the train, Jerusalem's light rail, would be going down the street today.
Exactly. It would be coming from Rehov Yafo on the left, from Jaffa Street, and then making a 90-degree turn down towards, actually along the walls, down towards Shaar Shem, Damascus Gate, in the area of neighborhoods like Ramat Eshkol and Sanhedria. Oh, of course, Gilo and Mea Sharim would be off to the left after you make that turn. So,
if I'm not mistaken, those two buildings to the right of that wall, that dividing wall in the middle of the street, they are gone, and now it's just a park area, and you see the walls of the old city.
That's correct, 100% correct. So, just again, put into a frame, the building on the left is the wing of the French Hospice of Notre Dame, on whose roof we were able to go up to in 1963. But now you can see from another perspective, right, how that roof literally looked over no man's land and into the walls of the old city. The building that you referred to, which is the further building, totally no longer exists. It was very, very badly destroyed in the fighting of the War of Independence, was taken down by the Israelis almost immediately after the victory of the Six-Day War. And that's no longer there. That's part of that open plaza that you walk through today, getting down towards Rehov Yafo, to Jaffa Gate. And I think you're right, the building immediately on the right doesn't exist at all either anymore.
Yeah, no, I think that the abandoned hotel today, the hotel that stands empty, whatever, the Pearl, whatever.
Yeah, I think that's the corner of the Dan Pearl Hotel, which is abandoned, which is today sitting unoccupied. But yeah, I think you're right, that the building closest to us on the right would be the corner of the Dan Pearl Hotel today.
Possibly. Wow.
Yeah. But again, this is it. If you came down Jaffa Road past the post office, and again, I'm assuming people have been to Israel and been to Jerusalem, and you walk past the municipality buildings, which are on your left, and you come down to that intersection, there's a building with a round frontage. It was the old Barclays Bank. You can still see bullet holes in the bank from the fighting in 1947, 1948 of the War of Independence. But you would have had a forced right turn towards the King David Hotel. The left didn't exist. This was the beginning of no man's land. The walls of the old city are behind the building no longer, which exists in the back right, and maybe another 50 to 100 yards beyond that is the corner and sandbag Jordanian position of Jordanian Legion looking over Jerusalem from their side. Yeah. And it's hard to picture this. And wow, I occasionally even come there and I look and I remember that picture. I don't know why it is. It's just so emblazoned in my memory that I'll occasionally just still, out of my mind, just have this fleeting, wow,
Listen, I just wanted to take a second, Abba.
Yeah.
And, we received a comment from someone watching that strengthens my desire to have had this special Yom Yerushalayim video with you. And Epo Bruins writes, "It is so very special to hear this emotional story from an eyewitness. Thank you, Avi. It really should be thank you to you, Peter, Abelo, Abba. Shalom from the Netherlands." And that's
wow. Thank you so much from the Netherlands. It's a pleasure, and yeah.
Listen, you're not just giving a history. This is not just talking history. You're talking from your own eyewitness experience, experiencing Jerusalem as a tourist, but yet, and then living at today as an Israeli Jew, and contrasting. And it's an emotional thing. It's not just
right. Yeah. I'm still part of that amazingly fortunate generation in the history of the Jewish people that began my life before there was an Israel. Okay, I'm born in 1946. Israel was born in 1948. I don't remember the period of time, right? But for the Jewish people, the first 2 years of my life were the last 2 years of the 2,000 years without a state of Israel. So, I'm still part of that generation. Many of us, thank God, are still alive, who began our lives before there was a modern state of Israel. And that's why I love, Avi and I have a mutual friend named Tzipi Porath, who's 20 years older than me, right? And more than that, she's 22 years older than me, still alive, and who came from the United States back in 1947 to be a student on Mount Scopus, ended up fighting in the Haganah for the defense of Jerusalem. She says, listen, she was part of that dream. She began her life before there was a state of Israel. We cannot dare do anything today to jeopardize the right of the Jewish people to continue to have the state of Israel in safety and security. We dreamed about it for 2,000 years. Is it a perfect place? No. Is our government perfect? No. Are there shortcomings? Yes. Are there goals still to be attained? Yes. But whatever it is, we cannot dare jeopardize the fulfillment of that dream. I do remember the next step of that fulfillment, right, very vividly, having been here in 1963, so when Israel was 15 years young. And then I really wanted to come back in 67. I don't know if should I tell you that story quickly?
Please.
I'm graduating City College. It's June 1967. Already in May, things were looking fairly hot. I don't want to go into the whole story of the Six-Day War, but I was the president of Hillel the previous year. This was actually my 5th year of university because I was an engineering student. I had been president of Hillel. I was like a president emeritus and very active in Hillel organization on City College campus. And I don't know, maybe on the off chance somebody from those years is watching, but with an incredible group of friends that spanned an entire spectrum of Jewish identity, Jewish commitment, from the entire spectrum of Jews, what Hillel stood for and should stand for. A wonderful, wonderful mentor rabbi named Arthur Zuckerman, from the Reconstructionist movement. I was coming up on graduation and my finals, and the winds of war were blowing. I got my passport renewed. I was afraid to tell my mother. My father had passed away many years before, and I didn't want to quite tell her. She was left as a young widow with a child, 2 children, both. I was 12, my sister 9. Didn't know how to quite broach it with her, so I had the passport renewed and mailed to Hillel, right? And was looking for a way to get to Israel. And when I got the passport, I said, listen, Mom, I got my passport renewed. Israel's on the verge of war. I want to go. And she had obviously been looking forward to seeing her son graduate college. Right? That's a big thing for parents. So I said, well, and what about your final exams and all that? I said, so you know what, I'll make a deal. I will take my finals, but as soon as the last final is over, I'm taking the next plane to Israel. And she reluctantly agreed to my not going to graduation, and those were the terms. Finals week was June 5th, right? So I took my finals during probably maybe the week after, the week before, whatever it was. By the time my finals were over, so was the war. It was the Six-Day War, right? So I never quite made it to Israel that year. I mean, I was going to do whatever they needed to have done: fill sandbags, to deliver mail, work in a grocery store. They weren't looking for volunteers to come and fight. They were looking for volunteers to take the places of the men and women who had been drafted into the reserves and left huge voids in Israeli society, which gaps that had to be filled with volunteers. So I was ready to do that on a drop of a hat, and I never made it because
war was so quick.
The war was over. My finals were over. I went to graduation, which made my mother happy, I guess. The next first opportunity was the summer of 1969. In which I did come back. I came to Israel in 69. Debbie was also here at that point. We had just become engaged. We were here independently. We came back as a couple in 71. But I remember in 69 when I arrived, you remember you met me at the airport, and the first thing I wanted to do was go to Jerusalem. We took a bus and came to Jerusalem. Well, so I made it back.
How was going to Jerusalem for the first time a united capital when your last experience was divided? Any?
It was amazing. I mean, it was just euphoria. Like a child looking at things that you couldn't touch and couldn't see earlier, and all of a sudden now it's there and it's available and it's accessible. And I think that's what it kind of dawned on me. What I should have realized 4 years earlier as a teenager, right? How incredibly wrong it was that the world tolerated Jerusalem being divided and access being denied to the Jewish people to our holy sites in the Old City in particular. I went to Masada in 1969. We went by way of Jericho, right? In 63, we used to go by Beersheba and then all the way down around the bottom of the Dead Sea, which was a 2.5-hour drive or something. That's another thing. What are we going to give away the road connecting Israel and our sites along the Dead Sea? I don't know. I mean, crazy things we have to work out. But yeah, it was very special. Again, being able to do the things that I couldn't do back in 1963, and all of a sudden, it's being kind of like let out of jail, and I can do it now. Oh my God, let's go! And it was very exciting to be in Jerusalem. It was exciting to walk through neighborhoods which were 2 blocks from the border 4 years earlier, and which were now open neighborhoods being built up and developed as the city was developing and expanding.
And I imagine walking through the old city and walking to the western wall of the Temple Mount.
Yeah, so listen, the old city was all rubble in 1969 still, also 1971. They were in that euphoric stage of interesting. We talked earlier about some of the miracles of 67, or some of the events of 1948 which set the stage for 67. I'm always mystified. I don't know if I should say this publicly, I guess. I was always mystified of Jordan's failure from 1948 to 1967 to do anything with the Jewish quarter. They destroyed it. They came in, it was left in rubble. And for the next 19 years, on June 5th, 1967, it looked the same way it looked on May 29th, 1948. I mean, there were even bodies that were found from the fighting.
Really?
Yeah, in one corner, the memorial in one corner to a group of fighters that are now interred at Mount Herzl. But they didn't do anything. You know, the war is over. It's 1949. It's 1950. It's peaceful. It's quiet. They're in control of the old city. Never came in with bulldozers to clear the Jewish quarter out. Didn't clear the rubble. Didn't rebuild the Jordanian, Palestinian, Arab neighborhood there. It was just left the way it was. And we found it 19 years later, ready for us to come back. Didn't have to displace anybody. Didn't have to take down anything because it was all destroyed anyway. And there must have been a very interesting tug of war going on between the archaeologists who were saying, oh my God, an unprecedented opportunity to dig down into ancient Jerusalem. It's all destroyed anyway. And the architects and the city planners and city hall were saying, my God, we got to rebuild as fast as we can. And the truth is, as you walk through Jerusalem today, you see how that played out. There are sections in the Cardo where we were able to dig down and preserve and build new on top of it. But there was, I can imagine, the architects and the engineers, hurry up, we're ready to build. And the archaeologists saying, not yet, we got to go down deeper still. There's more to be discovered. But that must have been an incredibly exciting period. We were here in 71 as a couple, and we saw the excavations that were going on as things from ancient times were suddenly coming to light, things that hadn't been seen in 2,000 years since the destruction of Jerusalem in the year 2000 by the Romans.
And the beauty is that it's been preserved.
And it's been preserved, and we've preserved the old as well as building the new and planning for the future, which is why, by the way, I love that mural in the Cardo, but it's a different story. That's my tour guide story. So it was very exciting about getting back. And I think for me, there's no doubt that the seeds of Aliyah were probably planted in 1963. Right?
Even though you were a teenager who didn't totally appreciate what you were seeing?
Yeah, listen, I appreciated being a Jew in a country where the country pulsated Jewish. Right? Where everything is totally in sync, where they say Shabbat Shalom to you on the news on Friday afternoon, right? And where the signs are in Hebrew, right? And where everything about the country, I grew up in New York. Jews are a minority in New York. You'll never know it, but I'm still a minority. I went to public school, and I grew up essentially as an observant, practicing Jew in a non-Jewish culture. Okay? But I was involved Jewishly. I was involved with Hillel for all my years in university. Including being the president, and I was even involved in a national council of Hillels from all over the country. But I think coming to Israel was the moment of realization that I'm at home elsewhere, but not truly at home. Mm-hmm. And here, just for the 6 or 7 weeks of that summer, I was truly at home. Mm-hmm. I missed home. I missed America. There was no ketchup in Israel in 1963. I remember my mother, we only had one phone call that entire summer. It was 1963, right? You waited online at the post office and made an expensive call and booked for 3 minutes and hoped that you could hear each other. And that was it. And then, and with these asimonim, which rock, remember? So mom said, so what do you want when you come back? And I said, ketchup. Schnitzel. Oh yeah, we had schnitzel, no red meat at all. There were no hamburgers in Israel in '63. I remember, we had chicken and schnitzel, turkey schnitzels, gazos, which you get at these. Remember that? Like sparkling water in flavored syrup, and at 17, I missed the what do you say, the the cushions of life in the Western world, which Israel still didn't have even 15 years into its young existence. But what I gave up for those physical things was a sense of belonging and a sense of attachment, which I'm sure, colored my activities in Hillel, because I was just entering college at that point in my life in '63, and colored my involvement on behalf of Israel, especially in the years that I was the president of City College and involvement in the events of 1967.
Did you even mention about kibbutz?
Kibbutz, it was a different Israel. I was on kibbutz. It was fun. But we saw nothing. There were no national parks. Masada was up the Snake Trail to a flat mountaintop because it hadn't been excavated yet.
Oh, wow.
It was the one place we went to. Sachna. It was like a national swimming area, right? But none of the national parks. Caesarea, barely excavated today. I think we spent a few minutes there looking inside. There was nothing like what you see today. It was a different country. But what was the power of Israel? It was just the draw of knowing that as a Jew, I'm in the place where we are the majority culture, where the calendar, the pulse of life, is the Jewish calendar and the Jewish holidays and the Jewish events. And that probably had a very, very profound effect upon me, realizing that now I know what we mean when we say Israel's home also, right? Now Israel is home for me, right? But in those days, yeah, America is home, but Israel is home. I didn't quite get it. And '63 was a transitional moment for me. I get it. Wow. '67, I really got it. Anyway, so it's a really special day in Israel's history. It's a day in which we reunited the city, which rightfully we had a right to be in. It's a city today which the world is slowly beginning to recognize we have rights to, despite the lies that are said about us in the United Nations and the deniers which try to disconnect our Jewish past from our roots here in the land of Israel. I think that everybody in this country is tremendously proud of America, in that our embassy, the United States Embassy, is here where it belongs, in Jerusalem. It's our capital. We pray that others will slowly begin to follow suit. Others have up diplomatic ties in that direction, and you probably know more than I do about that. But I think that the celebration of the day of the reunification of Jerusalem is almost in a certain way more important than Independence Day itself. It's a very special day in our history.
Why more important than Independence Day? We would not have Jerusalem Day without Independence Day. So
that's true. But in terms of its ultimate significance, so Debbie says it's because Ilana and Ellie were married on Jerusalem Day. Your sister Ilana and her husband Ellie are celebrating their 22nd anniversary today. They married in 1998, right? Today. Why? Because Independence Day was a step. Independence Day was the beginning of the process. It was the turning point of 2,000 years of history, where we now have sovereignty and independence. But in a way, it was still incomplete. Major areas of ancient Israel were not in our hands anymore. Not only not in our hands, but they were inaccessible because enemies didn't allow us to, they didn't keep their deal in the armistice agreements. We were supposed to have access to our holy spots, right? Terrible massacres had taken place out in areas that were now being held by primarily in the West Bank area in Jordan. And we were returning to areas where we have a right to be. And I think that's very, very important. I'm not even talking about issues of sovereignty or annexation or whatever. We as Jews have a right to be there. It always mystified me. I always consider myself a fairly liberal thinking person. I grew up on the west side of Manhattan. How could you not be a liberal? And it always made no sense to me that liberals are ready to accept the notion there are places that Jews can't live. Right? I mean, a liberal precept is that people should be able to live everywhere. And all of a sudden, a plan for peace that means that I, as a Jew, can't live in places which are of tremendous historical significance to me and to our people is an anti-liberal concept, not a liberal concept. Right? Liberalism should mean a solution, whatever it is that I can live wherever I choose to live, and if it's where whatever. I think you got the point. In any event, 1967 was a critical turning point in that process. And now Jews can develop and live and grow in areas which are historical significance to us, and in more particular, visit Jerusalem and pray in Jerusalem and worship in Jerusalem, as can people of all religions. And under those 19 years, what characterized Jordanian rule was a denial of rights, a denial of religious rights. And I think Israel can be extremely proud that today, under Israeli administration, under Israeli authority, religious rights are being assured for all people of all religions. I think it's an amazing thing. When I take groups to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre as a guide, right? That the safety and security is being safeguarded by Israeli police. The right of Christians to visit their holy sites is being overseen and safeguarded by Israel. Sometimes we're even, whatever. Yeah, I mean, I think it's something we can be very, very proud about. But,
Yeah.
right. So to come back to, for 2,000 years we didn't have an Israel. Today we do. With all of the difficulties that we chase, we have to do everything to safeguard its right and ability to be here. Again, that means Iran. That means our whatever. Anybody wants to tries to deny that has to be dealt with. All right.
And you bring up a very important point, because again, under the illegal Jordanian occupation, there was no freedom of worship for anyone. Except Muslims and I guess whatever Christians would go in there. But again, under the Jewish state of Israel, we allow freedom of religion for all, including Christians, but even the Muslims. Freedom of religion for all, and that's only only in Israel is that really available, where everyone's safe to worship their way in their holy places. What's
the line that we say? Oh gosh, it ends l'chol ha'amim, that Jerusalem ultimately a place. V'avivotim l'har kodshi, v'aviyatim l'har kodshi, v'sematim betfilatim. Right, because my house of prayer is ultimately a house of prayer for all people. For all peoples, right? That's our book of Psalms. That's our vision. That Jerusalem is a place of Yeru Shalem, a city of Shalom, of peace for all people.
Right.
So I think that's why I think it's a very significant day, because Jerusalem once again coming under our sovereignty, reuniting not only the rights of Jews to be here, but of all peoples to be here, and the development that we've seen in these 52 years, which assures that and guarantees that, is something worth celebrating.
Abba, again, those who came in later, this is my father, Peter Abelo, veteran tour guide, Jewish educator, sharing his memories of Jerusalem, a divided Jerusalem, visiting in 1963, contrasting that with then coming later after 1967, adding a lot of memories and emotional anecdotes as well about everything. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Abba.
My pleasure, Avi. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for all of you who are listening in today from the Netherlands and everywhere for joining us and celebrating Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Reunification Day. Thank you.
And I will add to that, thank you to each and every one of you for watching anywhere you are in the world for this, again, special edition of Pulse of Israel for Jerusalem Day. Hope you enjoyed. If you liked it, please share it with others. Signing off from the eternal and ancestral homelands of the Jewish people, the land of Israel. Shalom, everyone. And Yom Yerushalayim Sameach, Happy Jerusalem Day. Celebrate the miracles. Be thankful for what we have.